Welcome to Psych Cinema, where we break down the psychology found in popular films. I'm your host, Jonathan Hederle. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and today I have a special guest with me. This is my colleague and friend, Emma Kate Wright. Thanks for joining me.
Absolutely, I'm excited to be here today.
And the reason I asked Emma Kate to join me today is because we're going to break down the new Beauty and the Beast film, the Disney remake, or as I like to call it, the real make. We're going to dive into some of the psychology found in the characters and in the film, but first, let's give a little brief synopsis for those of you that have been living in a haunted castle and haven't, been active in society. And then we can both just share a brief takeaway of what we thought of the film. So it really centers around a character named Belle, a small town girl in France, really wants to break out of her small village lifestyle, and she comes across a beast, basically a prince that had been cursed, and now he has to find true love before the rose petals fall. Otherwise, he and all of his servants at his castle will be cursed forever to a life of being looking like a buffalo or a candlestick or things along those lines. And then the whole film really is about them getting to know each other in a deeper level beneath sort of the exterior and finding true love. So this is a remake from the 1991 animated film. Emma Kate, what did you think about the remake?
Honestly, I loved this remake. I think the main reason I enjoyed it, though, is because of the nostalgia. This was my favorite movie, hands down, when I grew up. I was obsessed with Belle. My favorite outfit was purple, and it had roses all over it with Belle on it, and I couldn't get enough of this movie. So then when the remake came out, I was pumped. I went on opening night, and I enjoyed it so much. I know it wasn't like the highest quality movie, but I thought it was great. I really loved it.
Well, good. I recently saw it, and the music and a lot of the movie captures the charm and nostalgia, but there were other parts I thought were a little clunkier, but it just reminded me how perfect of a film the animated version is. But let's dive into the psychology in this film, because one of the things the remake does is it tends to put a spotlight on some of the deeper psychological themes of the story and the characters. So, Emma Kate, why don't you talk a little bit about the character of Belle, with gender roles and feminism, and what are some of the psychological themes found in her role?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this movie really did try to kind of build off of the feminism movement that we've been seeing, where now it's okay for women to have jobs. It's okay for you to not necessarily raise a family. You can do whatever you want as a female. And this remake really did a nice job of kind of getting at Belle's character, where she highlights these aspects. So, for example, Belle, she couldn't leave her town because she had to fill this very traditional gender role of taking care of her father. And that's kind of an expectation that a lot of females tend to have to take. However, she didn't quite fit the mold for the typical average girl. So the male Gaston, he just oozes sexism and, kind of says, "Marry me, Belle, I'll make you so happy you can rub my feet." Right. Every woman would love to just sit there and rub your feet. No, not so much. So she kind of denies him, and that really builds up this piece where it's like, no, she's a strong female. She doesn't have to get married. She can spend time reading, educating herself, and then she can fall in love with the beast who doesn't fit the norm, and she can do what she wants. So I really liked that they kind of highlighted that aspect of her.
And the role of Belle really is contrasted with both of the male characters in the film.
Yes.
First, you have the Beast, where because of his, because of his selfishness and because of his vanity, he's cursed to look like a hideous animal. And the only thing that's going to lift the curse is for him to fall in love with somebody and for that person to fall in love with him, which really runs counter to Belle's own personal agency and autonomy and independence. But it also requires him also to break out of the curse, because when you first see him, he is very avoidant, he's very irritable, he's not particularly pleasant. So there's a sense of hopelessness, maybe even depression that you see in him, because he's really given up. And despite him knowing that that's the only way to lift the curse, he spends all of these years basically in self-pity and making himself a victim in his own circumstances, versus recognizing the role that he played in not only cursing himself, but his entire household. But through his time with Belle, you see him starting to open up and for nurturing and tenderness to start to come out of the character, unlike Gaston, who really fits the textbook definition of a narcissist.
Yes.
So he's exceptionally vain, and he has very grandiose ideas about himself. He feels very entitled, and you see almost that narcissistic wound where he can't accept Belle, turning down his advances or his proposal to marry him, to where he goes above and beyond, and now he really exhibits sociopathic or antisocial traits, which he totally believes in, because a narcissist isn't able to sort of see, how they place themselves above everybody else's needs and regards. And unlike the Beast, and unlike Belle, Gaston doesn't change or soften. In fact, he gets harder and he gets more vain and egotistical and entitled, to the point where he's willing to put other people's lives at risk.
Right.
Now, one of the things that Beauty and the Beast has been talked a lot about is the whole issue of Stockholm Syndrome. And Emma, Kate, and I, we already talked about that in our podcast, the Shrink Tank podcast. So instead, I'd like for us to talk a little bit more about something in this film they seem to elevate a little bit more in the story, which is the role of family and childhood loss or trauma, as well as this concept that maybe not as many viewers are familiar with. It's called post-traumatic growth. And would you talk a little bit about that and what you saw in the film that kind of pointed towards that?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is really important for people to know about is post-traumatic growth is a newer area of research. At UNC Charlotte, it's Lawrence Calhoun and Richard Tedeschi. They have done a lot of research in this area, but there are a couple of things that are really critical to think about with post-traumatic growth. So you experience a trauma, and then the idea in a nutshell is that you are able to take that trauma and turn it into a positive. It's not to minimize the experience. It's not to say that it isn't hard and it is challenging, but it's finding essentially the silver lining. So for some people, their sense of self changes, where essentially you realize that, you are capable, you are strong, you can handle what you've been challenged with. People's relationships also tend to change when you've experienced a trauma, whether it's a deepening of a relationship where you value that individual a lot more, you share how much you care about them, or it could be that you're cutting off relationships that are no longer healthy, that you have a more clear boundary. Also, life philosophies tend to shift too. So your values, whether it's spending time with family or kind of that work-life balance, we see a really large shift in people that have this sort of post-traumatic growth where they say, nope, I'm not going to spend as much time at the office. I'm going to hang out with my friends. I'm going to do, have experiences in life that are more meaningful. And so within the film, I really tried to kind of look for opportunities where did this happen? And for the Beast, he really didn't kind of take that upon himself to have this sort of post-traumatic growth experience. Like you just described earlier, he really kind of became isolated. He got very moody, depressed, angry. And Belle, she did not have a mother growing up as a child. However, she really seemed to kind of come into her own with making sure that, she spent time with her father and learning and reading, and those were the things that she valued. So I like to think that maybe she did experience a little bit of post-traumatic growth.
And I do think that there's also a couple other elements in addition to post-traumatic growth that we can see the contrast between Belle and the Beast, even though this modern retelling emphasizes that they both have suffered the loss of a parent, of their mother. Mm-hmm. But in Belle's case, you have a very warm and nurturing parenting style from her father, which really allows her to continue to mourn, develop some resiliency, probably, that ability to bounce back from adversity, as well as post-traumatic growth. Like, she finds greater meaning in life, even though she still, in a lot of ways, is kind of haunted or has a lot of questions about her mom's death and why it happened. Then you look at the Beast, where by all accounts he has a very cold and distant and absent father once his mother dies, and so he takes on that kind of cold exterior himself. He's very demanding. He has a short temper. He doesn't really care about other people. He's very unsympathetic, and so you might ask, he doesn't exhibit some of those resilient traits, and in fact, who knows how much of that would have been different if he had a second parent like Belle did, that was more nurturing and caring during that time of grief, loss, and trauma at a young age.
Yeah, I can't help but agree with you on that, where some kids, when they experience the loss of a parent, they can be resilient to a certain extent, but then we don't really know exactly how it impacts you. We just know that it affects you kind of and leaves these scars that, last for decades, where you always kind of feel like, man, if I could just have one more day with my mom or one more day with my dad, and you lose that childhood sense where you feel like potentially you need to take on the responsibilities of the lost parent to help your other parent. So it really is kind of this very difficult, unique situation that I thought was surprising that they kind of highlighted within the film, which was not part of the original movie.
Yeah, definitely. This new version really places emphasis on some of the psychological themes of the backstory. And we'd love to hear from you guys. What are your thoughts about what we talked about here in this episode? And was there anything that we missed that you think really enriches the psychological themes of Beauty and the Beast? Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank my guest, Emma Kate Wright, for joining us and giving us a fresh perspective on the character of Belle. Be sure to follow us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, all of our social media. Also, be sure to check out our podcast, the Shrink Tank Podcast, where Emma Kate and I both participate in a roundtable discussion on popular culture and psychology. Until next time, this is Jonathan Hedderly. Thanks for watching.